Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the NERC CIP-012-1 implementation overview call. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating today's web conference. I'm also joined on the line by Robert Mellis, Narai Singh, James Brown, Keone Almeida, and John Spomer. Today's call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The presentation for today's call was sent out through the meeting invite, so hopefully you all got a copy of that, and then we are also presenting it on the WebEx. We will be taking questions throughout the call today, and you can enter the question queue at any time by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. Just a reminder to everyone to please start by introducing yourself before asking your question. So for today's call, we'll be providing some background and scope on NERC CIP-012 and then we'll go over logical protection via encryption, as well as the network layer encryption on Energy Communication Network, or ECN for short, and then wrap up the call with some frequently asked questions and then take any questions from stakeholders. So with that, I will hand it over to Robert, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your time, or taking the time out today. I know we're all working, or most of us are working on somewhat extraordinary circumstances. So again, I appreciate you all taking the time. So if you could go ahead, I'll give you the background and scope here. If you could go ahead and go one slide forward. So CIP-012-1 is related to cybersecurity communication between control centers, and it is a requirement to mitigate the risks posed by unauthorized disclosure and unauthorized modification of real-time assessment and real-time monitoring data while being transmitted between control centers. The NERC date of implementation is at 7/1 of 2022. That's a 24-month implementation date. And the ISO plans to meet the technical requirements, or to provide technical methodology to meet the requirements through the ISO's Energy Communication Network, or ECN. We will implement network layer security controls between all of the entities who use the ISO's ECN network. You could go ahead. Thank you. So again, the language of the standard is to mitigate risks posed by unauthorized disclosure and unauthorized modification of real-time assessment and real-time monitoring data while being transmitted between control centers. In March, NERC published an implementation guidance, or at least an initial implementation guidance document. And in that document, they outline possible ways to meet the requirements of the standard, and those would include security protection of a physical type of protection, or a logical type of protection of the data, or some combination of both. If you could go ahead and go to the next, please. So physical protection of links which transmit data. It's really not feasible for control centers which are geographically dispersed throughout the Western Interconnect. It's virtually impossible to encase within some sort of hardened conduit physical communication circuits across, hundreds if not thousands of miles. So the reality of it is that the logical protection of in-scope data is really the way that it would probably have to occur, and that can be achieved by encryption of the data in transit between control centers. That data in transit between control centers, for the most part, traverses the ISO's ECN network. You can go ahead and go to the next, please. So the ISO VCN network is a multi-protocol label switching virtual private network. The acronym is MPLS VPN. It is a nationwide, if not actually in fact a North American-wide, because we have connections in Canada and Mexico, wide area network managed on behalf of the ISO by our service provider, which is AT&T. The primary use of the ISO ECN is to provide telemetry to the ISO and support the ISO's balancing authority, responsibilities, transmission operator authorities, and also for the RC West reliability coordination responsibility. The ISO ECN is used by all registered entities in the Western Interconnect to exchange real-time telemetry data, not only with the ISO, but also with the RC West and between adjacent BAs and TOPs. There is a logical portion of the ECN that's commonly referred to as the WEC Operations Network, or WAN. So depending on your context or how long you've been in your respective role, sometimes folks refer to the WAN, which is in fact a logical segmentation of the overall ECN. The ECN or WAN is an any-to-any network, again, because it is not just entities communicating with the ISO and RC West, it's also entities communicating between each other. So a network layer and encryption technology solution must allow for that any-to-any network traffic while also enforcing encryption of the in-scope data, the real-time assessment, and real-time monitoring data. You could go to the next, please. So AT&T, which is the ISO's ECN service provider, will implement technology called Dynamic Multi-Point Virtual Private Network, or DMVPN, at each ECN customer edge router for all ECN registered entities who are required to meet the compliance with NERC CIP-012. The requirements of those apply to balancing authorities, generator operators, generator owners, reliability coordinators, transmission operators, and transmission owners. DMVPN at the edge of the ECN provides the security protection, the logical protection that meets the requirement of CIP-012. Go ahead and go to the next, please. If you could just bear with me for 1 second, let me bring up the answers here that we put together. So these FAQs are something that we put together in anticipation of what we expect would be at least a minimum number of questions. And obviously, we also understand that there may be more. So how will DMVPN be implemented by AT&T? The first step of the process is for AT&T to reach out to each of the entities who are required to be in compliance with CIP-012 and begin the conversations with each of those entities to provide contract information and make sure that they've established good, solid contacts to work with going forward. And excuse me, I apologize. I'm struggling a little bit because I've lost my closed out my window here. So, will our company be required to purchase any new hardware or software as part of the implementation of DMVPN? And so the answer to that one is very likely yes. The encryption technology takes some additional computing overhead CPU memory and things like that that are likely won't be met by the existing customer edge router, ECN customer edge router that you may have today. So it's likely that you'll have to replace that customer edge router with a router that is of sufficient computing power and supports the encryption technology software feature of DMVPN. We currently manage our ECN customer edge router. Will we be able to continue to do so when DMVPN is implemented? And the answer to that is no. In order to have a coherent and cohesive platform, technology platform, and due to the complexity of maintaining this multi-point to multi-point solution, it would be untenable to have multiple system administrators of that entire solution. Having AT&T's managed network, managed router service also provides additional availability for you all, because with that managed router NOC, Network Operations Center, the NOC then owns every fault from beginning to end, including engaging either AT&T or the local telecommunications last mile service provider. And the statistics over many years show that the mean time to restore service from a managed router connection is much shorter than for a customer managed site. What can we expect in terms of monthly recurring costs for the the one-time implementation cost? The router hardware that's supportive of DMVPN is approximately $3,600 per router. Some of you may have a single router at a single control center connected to the ECN, but many of you have two routers for redundancy, and in fact may have two routers at two locations. So you'll have to take that into account as you go plan moving forward for budgets and the like. And what can we expect in terms of the monthly recurring costs for the DMVPN service? So the managed router service for AT&T is $163 a month. So that's in addition to the circuit costs that you pay today. Will we need an upgrade to our ECN circuit and or increase our ECN circuit bandwidth in order to implement DMVPN? The short answer is no. We do not believe that the encryption service will add overhead in terms of bandwidth to the communication path. If you have concerns and you are currently an AT&T managed router customer, we can work with you to get reporting statistics and analysis of your current utilization of your circuit, just to give you some level of confidence that you are not, in a position where you're at risk of using up more than the available bandwidth. If you currently manage your own router today, you will have to figure out a way to look at the device and come up with that bandwidth utilization on your own. When will the implementation of DMVPN begin? Our desire is to begin this as soon as possible. The first step from our perspective is really this kickoff meeting with you all, kind of present that solution, and then again, solicit valid contacts to work with, for AT&T to work with, really to get the process to start. Will the implementation of DMVPN provide security controls for transmitting in-scope data between control centers when that communication is between entities that do not include ISO or RC-West? And that answer is yes, so long as those other entities that are not the ISO or RC West are also participating in this holistic DMVPN solution. So if you communicate today using the ECN with an adjacent VA, adjacent TOP, and they are also, and you do so via the California ISO ECN or WAN, then those security controls will include that communication path as well as your communication to the ISO and or RC West. Can AT&T attest to the DMVPN solution as meeting the requirement of CIP-012-1? No vendor is going to sit with you at an audit and prove to auditors that a given technical solution meets a requirement. However, given the implementation guidance document from NERC, and it's speaking to specifically to encryption as a solution, as a logical solution, we believe that this technology, this DMVPN encryption technology, will in fact meet the requirement of CIP-12. Will DMVPN on the ECN meet the CIP-12 requirements for communication of in-scope data between my own primary and backup control center? The answer to that is likely no. Most folks who have a primary and backup control center use their own connectivity, typically a private leased line connection or more than one, between their primary and control centers. Unless your only path between your own control centers is the ISO's ECN, you're likely going to have to apply your own set of security controls across your own private circuits that connect your primary and backup site. So again, that's a relatively short list of questions and answers that we anticipated would be out there. However, we are also aware that there may be more. So with that, I'll open it up to those questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
So a reminder, you can enter the question queue by pressing #2. And Rita, will you let us know if anybody enters the queue?
Yes, I will. We do not have any questions. We do have a question. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead. Your phone may be muted. Please unmute your phone.
Hi, it's Jeff Race from GridForce. My question relates to AT&T comes out to the GridForce data center, they implement a new router, or they implement a router with our network communications folks. But the counterparties we've connected to have not implemented DMVPN yet. How are we going to be able to communicate DMVPN to the WEC-WAN if the counterparties are not already upgraded to DMVPN?
So I think I know what you're asking. The DMVPN effectively encrypts traffic based on filters, I'll say. So you can define or work with AT&T to define the endpoints, so to speak, on the network and the ports and protocols with which you want to encrypt. And the rest of your traffic will remain unencrypted. Is that an answer to your question?
So what you're saying is, just to use a couple of examples here, so if we're communicating with SRP from the GridForce Energy Management System, and they have not yet implemented encryption DMVPN on their side, then that traffic, when it gets to the router at the GridForce side, will not be encrypted to SRP. But if we're communicating with RC West, which has implemented DMVPN, then that traffic would be encrypted. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to the next question in the queue. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is John from BC Hydro. You said we might have to buy a new router. We recently upgraded our routers with AT&T to Cisco 46 something. Can you give us a exemplary model that would meet the VPN requirement?
It was John, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi, John. So I believe that the Cisco 4600 series is an example or a model of that does support DMVPN. But if you could do me a favor and offline send me an email with the details of of the model number and all of that, and I'd be happy to give you a better answer.
Okay.
So my email is rm, like Mary, ELIS, like Sam, at CAISO.com.
Okay. And how is AT&T, because we cannot monitor the router configuration, so how can we prove to NERC auditors that this VPN, DMVPN configuration is enabled all the time?
That's a good question. We are currently working through that with AT&T. Our initial thought, and it's not yet solidified, but our initial thought is because they will all be managed routers, we're able to open up what's called a MACD, right? A move, add, change, delete request with the managed router operations center. And so our initial thought is you could make a request, an ad hoc request at any time, to have them provide you with the output of that router that you can then show if it's an audit or if it's an annual self-certification, whatever the circumstance may be. So that's where we think it's going to go. But again, we're working through with AT&T now to see what makes the most sense.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to the next question. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, just one question. This is Barry with WAPA, Barry Jones with WAPA. Question regarding, so AT&T is going to have basically their major account center supporting the end router units, and so they'll have access to those from a monitoring perspective and from an electronic access perspective. Although there's nothing in the standard about that, because these are communication links that are potentially discrete communication links under CIP-5, are there any concerns, or have you established procedural controls or such around AT&T's ability to access and make changes on those end units?
No, you're correct in that from a SIP perspective, we would expect these devices to be outside of any kind of electronic security perimeter that you've established. In terms of procedures, I'm trying to think of the right way to answer it. They have service level agreements for managed router service. The managed router network operations center, there's a primary and a backup that are geographically diverse within the United States. So I think the short answer is you would have to come up with your own internal procedure on how, kind of when and how to contact the AT&T Network Operations Center should there be an issue that, whether it's an outage or again, if it's some sort of periodic thing that you need to get, if it's a move, add, change that you need to make, something like that.
Moving to the next question in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Robert. This is Dave from Turlock Irrigation District. How are you doing?
Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Robert. Good, good. A question for you is, with this new network, I'm assuming we're going to all have new IP addresses. So what is the coordination effort to, or is the ISO going to be helping coordinating all entities to update our ICCP partners and that type of thing?
Yeah, we're not planning to change IP addresses for any of this, not from what they exist today.
Okay, and maybe just to follow up on that, so then it would be replacing existing equipment with newer hardware, so there is possibly downtime for that, for everything to come back up. I guess the timeline would be helpful if you guys have any type of implementation timeline.
Yeah, so we have a very extremely high-level timeline, which is we want to get all this work started as soon as possible. 2 years sounds like a long time. This is a significant undertaking, so time is going to go fast. So ultimately, the July 1 of 2022 is the hard stop, right? Our desire is to be done with this well in advance of that. I don't think we really have much more of a timeline at this point. For us, really, this kickoff discussion and presentation was really key for us so that we could get started. What we didn't want to have happen is to have AT&T account folks reaching out to you all without this presentation, without this introduction, and have you wonder, you know, what are they talking about, what's going on. So this is really the first step, and this is really gets the ball rolling. And we will likely engage internal program office for project management and come up with our own implementation project plan and timeline, but we're not quite there yet.
Moving to the next in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Robert. This is Adam Gormley at Chelan County PUD.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry about that. So my question is follow-up, kind of the prior one about auditing and how do we show that AT&T is doing the compliance piece that's obligated here when they're the owner and operator of the equipment now, or at least the administrator? You mentioned requesting reports. You mentioned, the first question would be, has it been discussed to have those reports scheduled so that they're delivered by AT&T so we're not always begging them for evidence?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're working through with them, and I think the idea would be, in our example, we know every year we do, self-certification, and we have our own internal timelines around that, and when we're gathering evidence and such, and so, again, we know for sure that at least once a year we're going to make that request, and so we would schedule that. However, we also have, audit of all of our reliability standards, at least every 3 years. And so we would, again, schedule those around those times. And obviously everybody's audit schedule is different. WEC doesn't audit everybody all at the same time on the same days. So, yeah, we're working through the logistics of it, but based on the implementation guidance document that came out last month, in the implementation guidance, it talks about, it refers to examples of what could be provided to the audit entity for evidence of compliance, and it talks about captures or screenshots, I can't remember the exact verbiage, of configuration of the device that's enforcing that encryption. And so that's why we feel confident that being able to get that information from AT&T and provide it either, again, as part of an audit or as part of a self-certification should be sufficient.
Okay, thank you. My follow-on to that response is, are you also working with WEC to kind of verify that the approach is consistent with their audit approach for that evidence?
Yes, we are. We've been working through this notion of CIP-12 for years, since it's been on the table through the whole drafting process. Like most of the reliability standards, or at least most of the CIP standards, they're typically, the requirements are not prescriptive, right? They don't tell you how to do something. However, WEC, in my experience working through the data exchange work group and working with the WEC audit team, they readily admit that in this case, for this requirement, they can't think of another way to really meet the requirement other than encryption. And encryption at the application layer, encryption of ICCP, secure ICCP, that's obviously been something that's been out there and has just never really gotten off the ground. So we cannot count on that coming in the next 2 years. So network layer encryption, from my discussions with the WEC audit team, seems to be a reasonable approach. But again, I think that's something we'll continue to work with them, and they are also working with NERC, like with all the new standards, to really work through. For example, I don't know if you were on the WEC compliance call this week. I think it was earlier this week. They briefly touched on CIP-12, and one of the questions that they're still working through with NERC is further defining the actual data, right? Because they talk about real-time assessment and real-time monitoring data. So still working through, getting a better handle on the exact definition of what that means. So hopefully does that answer your question?
I guess the only follow-on to that would be just, if we're going to be requesting annual documentation, is that sufficient? Or do we need more? I mean, are you getting that kind of guidance out of WEC that, yeah, we can give you this data. I agree with the design as well, and this is really the only way to do it. But, as long as that's in alignment with, if we go to AT&T and ask them for this data, they're going to give it to us on the regularity that WEC is expecting us to ask for that data, or we're being sent it on that schedule.
Yeah, I think we can push that question through the data exchange EMS work group to figure out, working with the audit team at WEC, to get a better sense of what they expect. I understand what you're asking. Is this something that we're going to have some sort of continuous output or configuration change control or something along those lines to ensure that nothing changed from the 1 year snapshot to the next year snapshot? I think that's what you're asking, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we meaning the data exchange EMS work group and with WEC, the WEC work group, we'll continue to push that through in our discussions with our regular scheduled meetings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving to the next in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Robert. It's Matt Weber from SRP. So
hey, Matt.
Just to follow up on that, I think one of the things maybe that DEMSWIG could do, and we've done this at SRP for certain standards that we're not quite sure if our implementation is going to meet the requirement or their audit approach, is we actually will sit down with them, tell them what we're planning on doing, and they will tell you, yes, if you did it that way, we would find you compliant. So I think that might be something, an approach the DEMSWIG could take to get that answer. Since, I mean, I think what you're doing is right on, but just to get that confirmation, since we're all going to be spending a lot of money and spending a lot of resources to do it, would be a good kind of final step. And then
I agree. You and I both. Sorry, I was going to say you and I both have that same experience, right? Where they're the audit team at WEX always very transparent with us, and they'll tell you yes or no.
And then the only other question, you kind of answered it, is I was going to ask about the implementation plan. When is this going to start? And you answered that. Is CISO going to be the project manager on this? Or is it going to be AT&T?
So our plan is to, it'll be a combination of both. So we'll own kind of the big picture, I think, from a project management perspective, tracking who's done, so to speak, who's cut over, all those things. But AT&T will drive, their project team will drive individual connections, right, or individual sites and individual turnups, and will provide back to us the results and the status of kind of where we are so that we can see that bigger picture. It will be similar to the most recent example I can think of is the synchrophaser data network migration, right, from the Harris network to the AT&T WISP network, where we work with AT&T, we help define the scope with them, we help provide them with contact information, and then we sort of let them loose, and then they start going individually and engaging with all the individual entities, and then they provide feedback to us to say where folks are, who's at what step in the process, and then they then come to us for escalation or questions, or if they have concerns about different entities or locations that may be falling behind, and then we then turn around and with the help of our resources try to help manage and try to help push those issues through.
Okay, and so my next statement is going to be that was not a real good experience. We were actually late on the synchrophaser project, which we definitely don't want to be late on this one. I know we're starting early, but like you said, 2 years is a short time period, so hopefully we can have a better experience with that.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, it doesn't make you feel any better, I'm sure, but yeah, your particular site was definitely one of those ones where there was a number of challenges, more so than I think almost every other one. And so a couple things we have, I think, in this case in our favor is this is really a hardware implementation at the end of the day, right? It's not curing new circuits. It's not engaging with the local exchange carriers. All the things that really hung us up with the few sites, the few of these synchrophaser network migration sites that like yours that had issues, they were all of those things, right? There were issues with Lex and ordering process and all that. So the thing we have, I think, in this case in our favor is that all those variables don't come into play. It really is ultimately a contractual exercise and then a hardware replacement exercise for the most part. It's not to say that it's simple. It's not simple. It's going to be technically, challenging, and we're going to have to be very careful about the way we do it. But a lot of those challenges we saw with the synchrophaser data network will be off the table, which I think is a good thing.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Moving to the next in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Jason Royson with Modesto Irrigation District. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Jason.
Hi. So a couple questions. One is, so just looking through the implementation guidelines, right, we're required to identify the DMARC points. So just wanted to clarify, will the multi-point VPN encryption be implemented solely on the customer-owned AT&T managed routers that are on-prem at the customer sites? Or is there anything central in AT&T's infrastructure that is encrypting or decrypting the traffic?
No, the beginning and end of that encryption is at that customer edge route.
Okay, so that's good. You know, actually, you got to answer that question, right? And the next is, I understand that you're saying that we would ask AT&T for proof of things being in place. It seems like since all entities are going to need this at least once a year, most likely for their self-cert, a few requests, I guess, that I would think seem to make sense is one, that the AT&T technical implementation team gives some sort of base documentation explaining what the multi-point VPN is and how it encrypts, right? So in other words, since it's their magic black box that's doing it, that they should give some, hey, here's the proof of it, and this is where not necessarily in every config, but this is the parts of the config that make this prove that it's on, right? So some sort of high-level documentation saying this is what it is. And then second on that is it seems like we should have some sort of automated or query-based system where we can go to AT&T system and say, you know, if we're site A, show me A to Z's, the proof of that, because it's on both sides, right? It's not just our side, it's our side and the other side have to have it implemented. So some sort of automated thing to say, hey, show me all of my connections and the endpoints that either are or are not implemented, or show me all of mine to everywhere that I might go to that are or not. It seems like we should have some sort of automated way to query that or get monthly or whatever status reports on that instead of us initiating it, but it should just be available where we could have an automated system or just something that's giving us those reports on a regular basis.
Yeah. So on the first part of the question, again, this obviously hasn't been fully vetted. We're still working with the AT&T technical team, but what I would expect is upon implementation, right? I would expect them to hand you an as-built document, right, as for lack of a better way of saying it, which would show, to your point, here's the configuration, here's the area of the configuration of the router that specifically enables that encryption, and here is a route list or however you want to phrase it that shows you those associations, right? So you are encrypting traffic with these 5 other endpoints out on the ECN. So I agree with you, and I think as we continue to work with AT&T, we'll figure out the best way to have that initial documentation that shows it has been implemented and here's how it's been implemented. And then as far as the ongoing sort of dashboard or self-serve reporting or those sorts of things, off the top of my head, I don't know what's possible, but I agree with you in your assessment, which if it's something we could get to technically, I would agree that would be a good thing. So I'll take that back and I'll continue to work with them. Obviously they have multiple configuration and fault management platforms. So it's possible that they may be able to pull something together that you could, I don't know, like I said, either subscribe to or sign into or what have you. Part of the challenge is that it's one of those things where we have this big, massive network with all these connections to it, and from a contractual perspective, the ISO owns sort of the master of all of it, but they're individually contracting with everyone that's connecting to it. And so when it comes to things like this, it comes down to like centralized platforms. We need to be careful because we don't want to get in a situation where, Dave can see Matt's information and vice versa, something like that, right? So I'll take that back and we'll see what we can come up with, but I do understand where you're going, and I would agree in principle that if we can get there, that would be ideal.
Sure, and if I could ask maybe a follow-on with that, I understand your concern about not necessarily seeing the other side, but I guess in the technical proof of once it's enabled on our side, if it's disabled on the other side, can traffic still flow? In other words, like a negative showing, hey, yeah, once this is turned on, if it's disabled on the other side, in other words, our configuration is proof enough. And then maybe the other side, instead of a query-based one, is if they had some sort of change control / monitoring and alerting. So in other words, if we were getting anytime it changes on our side, here's the alert, and then maybe a once a month, yes, the config still matches what we gave you. So in other words, once we've implemented, if nothing's ever changed from there, we just get a monthly, nothing's changed, your config still matches the one on this date. Maybe that's a solution to get it done.
Yeah, so I think, and I think you touched on it, right? So if you're configured for encryption to talk to another endpoint, but they are not, your communication breaks, right? So I think you can prove, so to speak, that it's working in the fact that your data is flowing. And if the other side disabled their half of it, your communication would break, right? So I think that's part of it. And then I think the latter thing that you talked about around sort of configuration management, configuration monitoring, prove something that hasn't changed since the last time. Again, I think that's all part of that bigger picture. And we'll keep working with AT&T and figure out what's technically feasible.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Rita, how many more questions are in the queue?
We have around 9.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to the next in the queue, your line's muted. Please go ahead.
Hello, hi. This is Reza from Tri-State. I have 2 questions. The first question is that the DMVPN requires encryption key management. And my question is, who owns the key management part of it? And in case of a problem, who takes care of the troubleshooting? And if the answer to my first question is that AT&T is going to manage the encryption keys, so the data traversing through would be essentially exposed to them. So how is the legal logistics of this? Are there going to be NDAs, or how are we going to legally protect the data?
Okay, so yeah, I understand your question. So the answer is yes. So AT&T managing the entire solution holistically will manage the key servers, right, where the keys are stored. That's correct. The answer to, well, then they'll be able to see your data. Well, they could see it now because they are the search provider. So I think that's something we will have to work through with WEC. I think it's another question as far as the implementation guidance, and also working with WEC through the DEMSWIG is to understand, does WEC have concerns about the fact that that there is a third-party entity, so to speak, that technically has the keys to the encryption, and if they have, is there something that we need to do with them? To your point, is there some sort of NDA or something that we need to have with them that would shore up that concern, if that concern exists? So we'll include that in these ongoing discussions with WEC and get a better sense of what they feel is appropriate.
So can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're using AT&T services to safeguard the encryption of the data between control center to control center, shouldn't AT&T be audited instead of us on this standard?
I don't believe so, but again, I think that is a question as we continue to move through this discussions with WEC, but to me that doesn't necessarily line up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving to our next question. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Nate Johnson with Valley Electric. My question is related to AT&T specifically. Our routers currently are managed by AT&T, and this may be a little too early on to know the answer to this, but for that, in those particular cases, do you believe that AT&T will be reaching out to those entities that have the managed routers rather than everybody calling them at the same time to do these change outs? I believe I heard earlier that they would be able to provide the managed routers down the road as well.
Yeah, so our plan is to, once we validate that we have valid contact information for AT&T to use, AT&T has a project team already lined up and waiting to kick this off. And so they will proactively reach out to each of you, to those valid contacts, to initiate those discussions and contract paperwork and all of that. So you won't need to reach out to them. They will reach out to you, and they will hopefully do so here within the next couple of weeks at the latest. If you have concerns or if you feel like they've missed you or they have maybe the wrong contact for you or your company, what have you, feel free to reach out directly to me, and we'll definitely back. But yeah, the plan is that they have a project team that is ready to start this project, and so they are ready to begin that outreach to each of you.
Okay, that's great. And a follow-up to that, I'm assuming, as you mentioned earlier, the new routers, even managed by AT&T, will likely have a one-time cost to them, for them, I should say.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I believe that is around $3,600 is what they've put together.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to our next question. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Eric Chen with Southern California Edison. Just to kind of follow up on that previous question. So do you have a process for us to provide that contact information, or are you using another method in order to pass it on to AT&T?
Sure, yeah. So couple things. One is, unless after this call, unless we hear from you otherwise, we'll assume that everyone that we reached out to for this stakeholder call will be at least the initial contact, or can give AT&T the correct contact once they begin that outreach. That's kind of our starting point. Our starting point is the list of contacts that we used to pull together this call. But if there are folks that are, like, for example, in your case, if there are folks at Edison who are not on this call but will likely be the primary involved in the project, then please let us know, and then we'll update as needed.
Okay, thanks. We'll definitely do that. For those of us that manage our own routers, will we continue to do that, or is there the program to replace that with AT&T managed? And if we do continue to manage our own, will the technical details be worked out with AT&T separately or as part of this project?
Yeah, so the solution as proposed requires AT&T to do that edge router management. It's too difficult for the scale that we're talking about to have individuals managing in their own way multiple sets of configurations and configuration pairs and all that.
Okay, so the only provision is the AT&T managed routers from here on out. Correct.
But there again, and there's other benefits to that as well. It does come at a cost that you guys currently don't have today. But in terms of I feel like the reliability aspects of the monitoring and incident response is much better with a managed router as well.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Moving to our next question. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
This is Nick Braden from Modesto Irrigation District. hearing all the other questions that have been asked, my question has already been answered. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Nick.
Moving to our next question. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Marianne Horton with San Diego Gas and Electric. I'm wondering about how CIP-5, the new CIP-5 requirements interact with this. If AT&T is managing our routers and has access to them, is that considered vendor remote access to the router, and how do we deal with that for CIP-5? Also, the same question comes up with the end-to-end, the system-to-system communication. ICCP apparently counts as system-to-system communication for purposes of CIP-5, and we have to be able to tell who's on and to be able to force it off at any given time. If AT&T is managing the routers, how do we address those issues?
So the customer edge router that AT&T would manage would be outside of your electronic security perimeter, so it would be out of scope for CIP-5.
Okay. And you address this with Wi-Fi?
So it would not allow them vendor remote access into your ESP. It would be outside of that.
Okay. Follow-up question. Is this encryption going to be end-to-end between each pair of ICCP peers, or is each leg going to be encrypted separately and spliced together at some kind of hub?
It is between each of the individual connections. So that's the M and the DM VPN is multi-point. So it is there's no hub in between. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving to our next question. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, this is Brian Johns from Tacoma Power.
Hey, Brian.
Can you hear me? Hi. Yeah, so I have the first question I have is concerning the routers. So my understanding is we will buy the routers and purchase the routers ourselves. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah, through AT&T typically, yeah.
Okay, so we won't be necessarily leasing them. So on that, are we going to be responsible to carry the service contract and, the SmartNet support on those, or will AT&T carry that?
AT&T will. That's part of that managed router service monthly fee. It includes the SmartNet coverage for break fix, RMA, all of that stuff, yes.
Okay, great. So the second question I have is we currently have two connections that are kind of diversely located, and we monitor those. Will we have the ability to monitor these connections using our existing management and monitoring systems, or will we rely on AT&T to provide us outage information and when things go up and down?
Part of the ongoing technical discussions around AT&T, that's one of the topics. We're trying to see if it would be feasible to allow, for example, a read-only SNMP query from your internal systems, your internal monitoring systems, to query the AT&T Edge router. So we'll see where we can get with that, see if that's technically feasible. So that may be one option.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to the next in the queue. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Mauricio from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Quick question. When LA still is late to the WISP transition, and mostly because of our own terms and conditions or procurement issues, right? Where it hasn't been a smooth relationship with AT&T. Now, that was not required by regulation. Now, this is required. Is there anything we can do, I can do, or CISO can do to mitigate that issue again? Because as I see this one, sounds very similar, procurement of new hardware and a procurement of service.
Yeah, so I'm aware of the contractual challenges that you've had. So I guess the short answer is I'm not sure, right? I don't know if there's going to be any difference. But what we can do is we can get AT&T to provide you with the contractual documents and such for this particular project as soon as possible, right? As early as you can. That way, we can work through that, up front and hopefully as quickly as possible, so that we know if we do know we have challenges, we'll have time to address them, and we're not running up against the timeline like we did with the WISP transition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to our next question. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
This is Michael Martin from the Chelan County PUD. I have 3 short questions. The first one is the AT&T order form available for the router and the managed service?
It is available. It hasn't been released yet. It's not sitting out on our public website quite yet. We were waiting to get through this initial kickoff session before doing so, but it is written and ready.
Okay. And then secondly, is a specific router feature license, example for encryption, required for the supported routers?
Yes, I think there is a DMVPN encryption license that comes with the iOS of the router.
Okay.
Were you looking for like a specifically like a Cisco SKU for it?
Or just the name of whatever is required. So if we happen to purchase that separately, we just want to make sure we get any required licenses.
Yeah, if you want to send me an email, so I'll have your contact info. Just remind me of that question, and I can get back to you. It's rmelis@caiso.com.
All right, thank you. My last question is, does the CISO ECN contract specify timelines for applying security-related firmware updates to the routers?
I think in the managed router service, I think it does, but if you send me that email, I can follow up with you on that one.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robert.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Michael.
Moving to our next question. Your lines are muted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Robert. This is Barry Jones again with WAPA. Thanks for the information. Just a thought. I know you just said send an email. Is somebody capturing, there's a lot of items we're talking about here, a lot of parking lot items. And I'm concerned about AT&T's access, electronic access and their patching processes and their specification and build, as well as any underlying procedures regarding key management. So a couple of questions. Is somebody capturing all these parking lot items where we're going to kind of in second iteration of this meeting, we'll cover that part of it or those areas. And then thirdly, a timeline. And then fourth, getting the documentation kind of standardized. So we're definitely going to want to see the configuration on our endpoint and potentially what specifications are being used on that, if it's a virtual router or not or whatever. That includes, things like, what encryption standards being used and things like that. So I guess that's 2 questions about the parking lot list of items that we've all asked, and then secondly, kind of what what the next timeline would be.
Yeah, so we're capturing, you know, the various questions that have come in addition to what we anticipated, and so we'll include that in the follow-up. I don't know what the timeline for the follow-up will be, to be honest. I think we'll have to meet, we'll have to talk offline, internal, figure out what makes the most sense. I would want to at least have AT&T's project team start their outreach before we've scheduled another follow-up, because their outreach itself may raise additional questions. And then as far as the specifics that you were talking about, you know, the specific router encryption technologies and configurations and things like that, I think that goes back to that. Again, I'll just, for lack of a better term, I think that kind of goes back to that as-built documentation that would be sort of handed off to you that has all of that technical detail and information and configuration and all of that. To me, that seems like it would make the most sense to provide that. You know, potentially we could provide that generically even up front as we work through with the AT&T technical team and finalize the design and work through some initial, I don't want to call proof of concept because the concept has been proven, but sort of initial, I don't even know what the right term is.
Like a test acceptance.
Some of the early on connectors, right?
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll go a long way because it sounds like a lot of the questions are of the same nature and type. So it'll go a long way and kind of everybody kind of following the same process.
Yeah, so we have a weekly meeting with AT&T already. We started it like 6 weeks ago. So what I'll do is take a lot of these questions and issues, start adding those to the agenda of our standing weekly AT&T meeting around CIP-12 implementation, and that'll get, you know, that'll help as well from an overall project perspective to make sure we're tracking those through.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Moving to the last question in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. You described the situation. This is Scott with Tacoma Power. You described the situation where we transition to the DMVPN connection, and then we will have other connections to other partners potentially that are not going through that connection. Wondering, do we need to manage our partner connections when they transition then to DMVPN? Do we need to contact AT&T with each entity change?
Yeah, I think that coordination has to occur, right? You have to, and you can obviously, we'll work out the logistics of how that works. But yes, you are correct. So if you go, or if you're already exchanging data with one entity, right, your first one that's in, you know, on each side is set up for DMVPN encryption, and then you go to then, you know, your other partner. Let's say you only have two. So your second partner, when they are then ready to turn that up, you will definitely have to coordinate with them in real time as a transition from unencrypted to encrypted.
Okay, got it. And then
so yeah, so depending on your sort of matrix of communication, it could be fairly simple, right, or it could be pretty complex.
Right, and it could be consistent change over the next couple of years. Okay.
Yeah,
can you do us a favor and put your email address up on screen by chance?
Yeah, let me see if I'm smart enough to figure that one out. Hold on.
Yeah, we appreciate all your help with this process for sure.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're definitely all in this together here. Okay.
Robert, I can add your email address to the slide and reshare it. So just give me 1 second.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions in the queue in the meantime?
We have no further questions in the queue.
I have a comment here.
Is there a question?
We do have a new question.
Yeah, go ahead.
We do have a new question in the queue. Your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is John again. We have HSRP set up, redundant router set up at our primary control center. So this DMVPN works with HSRP, right?
Yes, I believe so. I'll confirm, but I'm 99% sure it does.
And I understood from last question that this is not when you implement DMVPN, it's not encrypted for everyone. It's per connection, per IP based, IP to IP encryption.
So it is configurable in a number of ways, including source destination pairs or source destination, some combination of source destination and port and protocol. So it's flexible in the way that you can configure it.
Okay.
So Robert's email is now on the slide, so make a note and send him any questions you may have. Rita, are there any other questions in the queue? Yeah, no problem.
We have no further questions in the queue.
Robert, did you have anything you wanted to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to reiterate, so we'll have a combined ISO technology and project management team queued up and available throughout this entire project of implementation. And also myself or my manager, who is Hugo Fretsch, are both available for escalation throughout the entire process. I understand it's going to be a lengthy process, but we, the ISO team, myself, my manager, my director, will be available throughout the entirety to help drive this through and provide support and escalation as needed. So I appreciate all of you taking the time this afternoon to hear out the presentation and ask the questions, and that really helps us set up for moving forward. And again, thank you very much.
And just to reiterate, this call was recorded, and we will send the link to the recording once it's available out to everyone who is included on the meeting invite. So look for that probably either by end of this week or early next week. So with that, that concludes today's call. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.